Target acquired.
Hey, how's it going everyone? Today we're going to be talking about why we banned Pokemon and Smogon metagames. I've been procrastinating this video for a long time, but after a lot of delaying by me and a lot of different attempts on the subject, today we are going to finally dive into the subjects and the waters of banning. And actually, when it comes to Sword and Shield Overused, even though it's still a pretty young metagame, we've already seen a couple bans to the likes of Darmanitan, Galar, Dracovish, Magearna, and most recently Cinderace. This topic is actually pretty relevant right now. But it seems to me that most of the seasoned, experienced vets of competitive play are generally in agreement when it comes to these bans. Just looking at those Pokemon I rattled off earlier, 90% of Dracovish voters agreed to its ban, 83% agreed on Magearna, and 75% just recently agreed on Cinderace being banned. However, one of those common sentiments that I see from Pokemon newcomers when they're learning about the Smogon format is frustration at banned Pokemon. Oftentimes it's because one of their favorites got banned, or maybe they think Smogon is banning everything good. In fact, I've often seen complaints that Smogon is mainly banning offensive Pokemon so that stall can ruin the metagame, which is certainly a take. So as I mentioned, I've been meaning to make this video for a while to clear up misconceptions I see on bans and really just explain why it's so important to the health of a metagame. First things first, why do we ban any Pokemon? Like, period. Let's say that Kyurem White or Mega Rayquaza are my favorite Pokemon. If that's the case, and I want to use them, why are they banned from Overuse, the main tier of competitive play on Smogon? Simply put, Legendaries are generally way too strong for the rest of the Pokedex to compete. They average something like 600 to 700 in base stat totals, which absolutely dwarfs an otherwise very strong Pokemon like Mamoswine, who has a total of 530. Generally speaking, weaker Legendaries like Celebi and the Laddies or Mew or whatever, they're more competitive and fit for most metagames, but they still have a very good base stat total of 600, let's say. But of course, just looking at the total numbers of a Pokemon isn't what makes them legendaries, of course. I just mentioned that to give you an idea of how they generally stack up versus your average Pokemon. Because your average legendary also has access to some insanely strong unique moves. They often have incredible typings, yada yada. The fact is that regardless of your opinion, Game Freak named them legendary for a reason. They simply were not designed to be on par with your average Pokemon, and there's a reason why they're often banned in official Nintendo formats. If they're allowed in Overuse, there would be no reason for you to use anything except for legendary Pokemon because they're just such a notch above the rest. Which is, of course, why the entire tier of Ubers exists. They're simply a class above the Overuse Pokemon, and if you want to play with them, then great. That's what the Ubers tier exists for. It's just for the Legendaries and other Pokemon that are too strong for Overused. Now, of course, what I just mentioned is probably very obvious to a lot of you. However, that same logic I use to disqualify Legendaries from Overuse also applies to why we banned some other Pokemon. The best example from this generation is Darmanitan Galar. Once again, if we were to bring up the topics of base stat totals, it's simply just not that impressive. Its typing 2, while not bad offensively, is absolutely brutal defensively, being weak to Stealth Rocks, Fire, Fighting, and Steel. However, despite those caveats, the simple fact is this thing is one of the strongest attackers in Pokemon. Its ability Guerrilla Tactics adds a 50% boost to its already monstrous 140 base attack, meaning it's nearly impossible to swap into safely. In fact, to go a bit deeper into that statement, of the roughly 40 Pokemon in Overuse right now, there's only 9 that can swap into Darmanitan's Icicle Crash safely without being 2-hit KO'd. And of those 9, 6 are yeeted out of the game with Flare Blitz, 2 are easily handled by Earthquake, which just leaves Rotom Heat, who lacks consistent recovery for starters, and can also get hit by a Rock Slide. Honestly, the best counter to this thing that I can think of has got to be a max defense Slowbro. And again, even then, a max defense Slowbro is losing nearly half of its health to a U-turn, which lets the opponent get in an even better matchup straight away. And that's just the Scarf set we're talking about, not the banded one, which hits even harder. So again, I mentioned all this to kind of paint a picture of Darmanitan here. Clearly, much like a Zacian or a Groudon, it is simply too strong to be on par with the rest of the normal Pokemon. A similar case, but definitely different, was Dracovish. And I've talked about this Pokemon before in some discussion videos, but I'll go over the basics again. Much like Darmanitan Galar, this thing hit like a truck and destroyed most of the metagame with the Scarf set, let alone its band. However, unlike Darmanitan, it had some pretty clear counters. Pokemon like Toxapex and Ferrothorn and Seismitoad could definitely wall it. And even if it swapped moves and used something like Crunch, those Pokemon were still just fine. And quick aside for those following along at home, you'll start to notice that this sounds very familiar with Urshifu Single Strike. Food for thought, food for thought. But again, knowing that Dracovish had common accessible counters, people then asked, well, like if it has answers in the metagame and there's things you can do to beat it, what's the big deal? Isn't this thing competitively balanced? And to answer that question, I'm going to take you on a hypothetical here. Let's say we all wake up tomorrow to the news that Game Freak has added a new and insanely strong Pokemon to Sword and Shield. We'll call it the Chickensaurus. The Chickensaurus has 250 special attack and 250 base speed, doesn't really matter, dragon fire typing, whatever. The point is, it'll be the most strong Pokemon that we've ever seen ever. However, it comes with the ability Phobia of Rats, which means that every time the Pokemon Deden enters the field, it faints instantly. So really, we gotta ask ourselves, this Pokemon is pretty balanced, right? Sure, it's really strong if it's left unchecked, but all you need to do is include a Deden on your team and it's all good, right? Of course, the problem is, if this hypothetical were to actually exist, then this would force Deden onto every single team in Pokemon. Even if the Chickensaurus really never got used and had like 5% usage stats, no player's gonna run a team that has a chance of instantly losing a Chickensaurus, and almost every team is going to use a Deden as a result to kind of protect themselves from that possibility. This effect is what we call overcentralization in the Pokemon community. When a Pokemon maybe isn't necessarily overpowered and destroying the metagame, but instead shifting or warping the metagame around it, making it the centerpiece of most games and team builds, then it's so centralizing so as to be detrimental. Once again, we call it overcentralizing. So you can see how Dracovish was a similar case. It didn't matter that its answers were common Pokemon. Any Pokemon metagame that forces you to have a specific Pokemon in it to remain competitive is really against the spirit of the game, limiting your team building and your creativity. Not to mention it also affects how you even play the game, let alone build teams. I'll freely admit that I was running teams back then where the express purpose of them was to use Pokemon that cleared Dracovish's counters, then Dracovish could just easily kill the rest of the team, no difficulty. So trust me when I say that overcentralization can really sap the creativity out of Pokemon. I actually put out a video on the topic when I mentioned that the banning of Dracovish really opened up the field for new Pokemon to be stealth rockers. And I think that prediction ended up being generally true, because if we look at the position nowadays versus back in May when Dracovish was around, it feels a lot more fluid and natural, and it seems like there's a lot more people that can fill that role than back then when it was just Seismitoad. Not to mention, as a quick aside, I found it absolutely insane that people were claiming that a banned Dracovish meant that offense itself was getting nerfed. If anything, it meant that you needed less defensive pieces to not get swept 6-0 from a single move on a single Pokemon. Bulky Pokemon like Seismitoad and Ferrothorn actually dropped in usage from 1 month from 22 and 19% usage to 14 and 6% respectively. But here's where we get to the difficulty in my making of this video, because it's all well and good to say that a Pokemon that's too powerful should be banned, or a Pokemon that's too overcentralizing should be banned, but how do we judge when it reaches that point? After all, if we look at Latios in the black and white metagame, it's very central. It's an important fixture of how that metagame works. So how do we tell the differences between that, which we are calling healthy for the time being, versus something that's overcentralizing like Dracovish was? How do we define the exact line between strong and too strong, central and overcentralizing? This is of course why to vote in a ban, you need to reach voting requirements, establish yourself as a strong player, and then state your case in the forums. It's something that people debate in pages and pages of forums ad nauseum because it's such a difficult topic to get into. To answer a nuanced, tricky question like this, I enlisted the help of Finchinator, who's a former OU tier leader and a sitting OU council member, in addition to being a great Pokemon YouTuber in his own right. And initially, I was just gonna stick like a 3-minute sound clip from him right here in the video and just like finish the video there. But when I got to talking to him, we had this great, interesting conversation that I feel like was too good to just cut to pieces. And I feel like I have to throw the whole thing up in its own YouTube video. So stay tuned for that. I'm editing it right now and hoping to get it up soon. But in the meantime, that's gonna be me done for this video. I hope you all enjoyed and learned something about why we ban Pokemon and what makes them ban-worthy in the first place. Make sure to check out that Finch video coming out too, but I'll see you next time.